So with that, if you want to turn to the book of Joel, chapter 2, we're just going to start by reading the first verse there. Last time I cut my head off, so not that it matters. All right, so Joel chapter 2, verse 1 says this: "Blow a trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble. For the day of the Lord is coming. Surely it is near." All right. So I want to ask the question, what is the day of the Lord? We talked a little bit about it last week, but I want to take this week and do a deep dive into what that is, the day of the Lord.
It's when God comes back to judge the nations.
Okay. So one aspect of the day of the Lord is that God is judging the nations. What else is the day of the Lord refer to?
Every day?
Every day? It's a specific time period that it's a future event that is going to happen.
So when God takes his people back.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's all connected to this time period or event of the day of the Lord. So in one sense, it's a judgment on all the nations. There is an aspect of judgment. It's called the time of Jacob's trouble. So it's also a time where the Jews are put to the test. Jesus came the first time and was rejected by the Jews. And they've been in a state of rejecting him as Messiah. So during that time, we have a time of the tribulation, which is a 7-year period in which the Jews, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble because they will be falsely welcomed in and elevated to a position of favor, and then they're gonna the world turns on them and persecutes them, and 2/3 of them will be destroyed. So the day of the Lord is a time of God's judgment on the nations. It's a time of God dealing with the Jews and his people. And ultimately will deliver them through that period, and then they will see him come back. So the second coming of Christ is him coming down to Jerusalem to save his people. And then there's a verse that says, "And all Israel will be saved." And that's the time period that's referring to. So two aspects of the day of the Lord. One is the judgment of the nations, and one is God dealing with his people, Israel. And using some of them during that time to spread the gospel, and then the others, it's a time of judgment on them for their disbelief. So let's start with Psalm chapter 2. Someone want to read the first 3 verses?
Psalms 2.
Yeah. Psalm 2, so verse 1, 2, and 3.
Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us.
Okay. Why are the nations in an uproar? Who is it that they're against? It says the kings of the earth take their stand against who?
Against the Lord,
Against the Lord and
his anointed.
notice it's capitalized, right? So who is his anointed?
Us.
Israel.
Kings? Are kings elected?
It's actually it's a reference. It's a reference to Messiah.
Oh, the anointed.
The Messiah, the
Christ.
anointed, yeah, his anointed one. So, the nations, the kings of the world, are raging against God and Jesus. Then he goes on and says this: he who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. So the kings are raging against God and his anointed, and what's going to happen? How does God respond to that?
Sounds like with an iron rod.
Yeah.
Is he speaking to Jesus in the speaking part?
He is, I think he's speaking to and reassuring his people,
Okay.
because what is God's response to the kings of the world raging against him? He laughs at them. I mean, just the thought, right, of humanity, like shaking their fist at God, like, I'm gonna get you. And God's laughing, like, oh, how cute. Right? He's scoffing at them because they think they have the power to go against God. But instead, he establishes Christ as the king, and then he rules them with a rod of iron. So that's what's coming. You have the human rebellion in the first 3 verses. Then you have God's divine reaction in the next 3 verses. And then you have God establishing his divine rule, control. Jesus is put on the throne. And again, part of the day of the Lord is ushering in Jesus to sit on the throne and rule and reign for the 1,000 years. So this is what he's talking about. And it says, as Jesus rules from the throne on Jerusalem, physically on the earth, he rules with a rod of iron. So ultimate control and authority. And then the last 3 verses, 10, 11, and 12, reflect how the people should respond to God and Jesus as king. So he says, now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are those who take refuge in him. So this psalm is really addressing the time of the day of the Lord. Talking about how the kings of the earth are going to be raging against God, and how Jesus comes back and establishes rule and then sets up his kingdom. So, next flip over to Isaiah chapter 13. Because first I want to spend some time looking at the first aspect of the day of the Lord, which is the judgment on the nations. So, what we just saw in kind of an overview in Psalm 2, when we get to Isaiah 13, we'll see more in depth of what that looks like. Isaiah 13 says this. Verse 1, it says, "The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw." What is Babylon?
Represents like the earth.
No, it was a
Rebellious.
capital city, wasn't it?
Like a thriving, successful
Okay. It was
utopia.
it was a kingdom. We're introduced to Nebuchadnezzar as the king of Babylon. We see in the book of Daniel, right, the prophet Daniel, he and the leaders. So God sends Babylon to take Israel captive for judgment, right? 70 years captivity. They didn't follow the law of God. They didn't rest. They didn't give the Sabbath year every 7 years. Every 7 years they were supposed to let the land rest. And so because they didn't, God said, "I'm going to take the time that you owe me." So King Nebuchadnezzar comes, defeats Israel, and in 3 waves takes people into captivity. So the first wave he comes and he takes all of the leadership and the promising youth, and he takes them and all the political leaders back with him, and establishes them. So this is where we find out Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are put in the service of King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has some dreams, and Daniel interprets the dreams. One of the dreams is the statue. What do you guys remember about the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreams about?
Ooh, I know this one.
Didn't it have like multiple parts of like?
It had multiple parts made of different.
Like bronze, clay, topaz, lapis lazuli. Like it was gold.
Okay.
It was different parts.
There was a head of gold. There was a chest and arms of silver. There was the torso and thighs of bronze, and then there were the legs and feet of iron, and the toes of iron and clay. Okay. Each one of those metals represented a kingdom, but all of them were part of the one statue. So Babylon was the first kingdom. It was the one that was ruled by Nebuchadnezzar. It was the kingdom of gold. It was the original. It was the most powerful. It had the most unified dominion. And then the next one, the next kingdom, and each of these kingdoms played a role in the rule and conquering of Israel. So God used these nations to control Israel. The second kingdom was the Medo-Persian kingdom, the Medes and the Persians. The two kings, Darius and Cyrus, had an alliance together. They came in and they conquered Babylon, and then they ruled.
So Isaiah was the one that predicted the fall of Babylon, if memory serves right. Nebuchadnezzar's son takes it over, and I believe there's a very interesting tale about the actual inception of the phrase "the writings on the wall,"
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because they were in the temple and the writing appeared on the wall, and Cyrus was able to get in there without attacking the civilian population. There was a center part of the city
Right.
that was like the capital, the DC, the swamp. kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
thing. And Cyrus is able to get in there and get control of the city without much bloodshed. And then, if memory serves, Isaiah shows him the prophecy of him doing that like the next morning in front of the people, and he becomes known as Cyrus the Builder, correct?
Yeah. So, Babylon was a city that was built over the.
Because the sun had run it into the ground, right?
Well, it was built over the Euphrates River.
Uh-huh.
When Nebuchadnezzar came, he took all of the temple items, artifacts out of the temple, all the gold and all the
Yeah, it's coming back to me.
the tools that were used for worship, and he brought it back to Babylon. But his son or grandson, there's different ways to interpret that. Just age-wise and the time frame, it was probably a grandson. But he's having a party, and in order to demonstrate the ultimate power and authority of their gods, they pulled out the artifacts from the temple of God, and they were using them to drink wine and party and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So then the writing appears on the wall. During that time, and they're like, what does that mean? And then his the current king, his grandmother says, well, Nebuchadnezzar had a guy who could interpret dreams and knew things, so they called
That's
Daniel
when
in.
Belshazzar goes to
Yeah,
Daniel.
yeah. So then he calls him in to interpret what's happening. In the meantime, the Persian army. So Babylon was built over the Euphrates, and they had gates that came down into the river, so you couldn't.
Oh yeah, the
go
moats
through.
run dry. That's how they get in, right?
So the Assyrians divert the river
Right.
and lower the level. So they're in the midst of this multiple day, month-long worship of the king.
Right.
So they're all in drunken revelry and partying, and there's no fear because they're impenetrable. Their walls are 60 feet thick and 90 feet high, and there's no way to... there was nothing to worry about.
Right.
But they diverted the water and were able to come under the gates.
Yep.
And in the middle of the night, they just basically walked into the palace and took over.
Took over. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Medo-Persians are the silver part of the statue. And then the bronze part is the Greek Empire. And then the legs of iron is the Roman Empire. And so Daniel explains these things. But what's important to understand is all of these nations are part of a single statue. The Babylonian system. So it's a political system, it's a religious system, that's the Babylonian system. It is having a king who's also the high priest and the one that is seen as part God. So he's worshipped as a demigod and is bowed down to and worshipped. We see this in the life of Nebuchadnezzar, right? He builds a golden statue 90 feet tall and makes everybody, when they hear the music, bow down and worship. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not, and he throws them in the fiery furnace.
This all sounds like Burning Man to me. But side note.
There is a reason that Burning Man does what they do.
I'm
They
aware.
are a continuation of the
Yeah.
Babylonian
I'm
worship
curious,
system.
This sounds a lot like the 7 different metals in alchemy and the planets, and all working as one system, or 7 chakras, or you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of overlay.
Yes.
There's a lot of teaching.
Yes.
I'm just curious.
Yes.
Thoughts on that?
And I don't know a lot about that specifically.
Easy.
But the religious system that was created at the Tower of Babel was the foundation of creating a system that elevates man to the position of God. When you go back and look at Cush, who is the grandson of Noah, one of his sons is Ham, Ham's son is Cush, the grandson is Nimrod. Cush and Nimrod together build Babylon, right? They build these walled cities. And so they establish, they build the Tower of Babel, which is a place of worship that elevates man to the highest position. From that, you have Cush, his wife Semiramis, and his son Nimrod. And they are the ones who create this religious system that elevates man instead of God. And when you look back at the different characteristics, for example, the symbol for Cush was the body of a bull with wings and the head of a man. And on his head was a tower that represented the Tower of Babel, or the authority. So when you go back into the ancient world, you have the bull being worshipped, because that symbolizes Cush, and it's the ancient worship of elevating man. And then when you look into all the symbolism of that throughout all of history, even today, where do you see a bull with wings?
Red Bull.
Red Bull gives you wings. Why?
Wings, yeah.
It's going back to the symbol of Cush, right? His son Nimrod, his symbol was a horse. And of course, he had a horn, because a horn represents authority. It is the tower. And when you see the ancient carvings, you see men and women. His wife Semiramis, her title is the Queen of Heaven. And when you look at the ancient carvings of like Artemis and some of these goddesses, they have towers on their head, because it's the worship of the Tower of Babel. It's all going back to that.
Which is like the man-made false belief of being able to master all 7 planets, all 7 worlds, all levels.
Yes. With Satan and his host empowering that worship.
Through Earth, like Taurus, which is
Yeah.
the bull sign.
Yep.
It's very, yeah.
Yeah. So all of those aspects are interconnected when you go back. The names for Cush historically, he is the god Chaos, because that at the Tower of Babel was when the languages were changed and mixed up. He is Kronos. He's the father of the gods. Saturn is another title for him. So all of these titles, which as it came down, they all became separate aspects, different gods. But when you go back, it's all referring to Cush, Semiramis, all of the female goddesses are different character traits and aspects of who she was. And then the son, which was Nimrod, he's also known as Tammuz, Semiramis and Tammuz. So the mother and child, when you go back in history, there's all these representations of the mother and child, and there's carvings they find, and there's different names throughout all the different religious systems that have that are set up, all the mythological systems. So you have the Egyptian mythology, all of these, the Roman, the Greek, all of these ancient mythologies, they all have a common source. Came out of the Tower of Babel. And then, so when Babylon is established as the kingdom, it is the ultimate expression of what the Tower of Babel was trying to do. It was a kingdom that controlled the whole area. It was totally powerful. Nebuchadnezzar had full control. He was worshipped as a god. And when Daniel interprets a dream, he says, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the greatest of all the kingdoms. So the head of gold represents that. But the entirety of the statue is one single statue, which means that all of these systems are Babylon, the Babylonian system. It is what became the Roman Empire. It's what became the Holy Roman Empire in the 800s with the crowning of Charlemagne. That was the reestablishment of this Babylonian system, all the way to Napoleon, who instead of having the Pope crown him, he crowned himself because he was the ultimate expression of. So, and actually Hitler, the reason that Hitler referred to his rule as the Third Reich is because Charlemagne was the first, Napoleon was the second, and he was the third. So he was the third iteration of this kingdom. That's what he was after. So he was making a connection with that when he was ruling and controlling the world. So when we see in Isaiah 13 the oracle concerning Babylon, then this is a judgment on this Babylonian system. When you get to Revelation chapter 19, where God actually judges Babylon, this whole system is finally addressed and ended. And so when we look at that, you'll see the people rejoicing at the destruction of Babylon, because this is the system that has been destroying and trying to destroy God's kingdom and system the whole time.
Revelations, what is it?
Revelation 19. 18 and 19 is
Where it gets interesting.
where it starts dealing with the ultimate destruction.
I'm very curious about this part.
Yeah.
Like, when the demiurge gets judged, like, how does that actually go down? And, yeah. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna read it.
So in Isaiah 13, we have Isaiah talking about this judgment of Babylon. And he says this, lift up a standard on the bare hill, raise your voice to them, wave the hand that may enter the doors of the nobles. I've commanded my consecrated ones, I have even called my mighty warriors, my proudly exulting ones, to execute my anger. A sound of tumult on the mountains, like that of many people, a sound of uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts is mustering the army for battle. They're coming from a far country, from the furthest horizons, the Lord and his instruments of indignation to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. So here he's naming it as the day of the Lord. So it's the future judgment that is coming on Babylon. It says it will come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will fall limp, and every man's heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take hold of them. They will writhe like women in labor. They will look at one another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel, with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud, and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make mortal men scarcer than pure gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his burning anger. And it will be that like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, they will each turn to his own people, and each one flee to his own land. Anyone who is found will be thrust through, and anyone who is captured will fall by the sword. Their little ones will also be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Okay. So, when you read through the book of Revelation and you see the judgments that are being poured out, the seal judgments and the bowl judgments, it is the fulfillment of this, right? The day of the Lord. These things are going to be happening. There's a few passages. Can I have some people who want to volunteer and read from a couple different places? Dominic, why don't you do Amos 5, 19 and 21. Tyler, do Obadiah 1, 15 and 16. Allie, do Zephaniah 1, 6 through 8. Do you have Amos?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Amos 5, 19 to 21.
As if a man fled from a lion, and a bear met him, or went into the house and leaned his hand against the wall, and a serpent bit him. It is not the day of the Lord darkness, and not light, and the gloom with no brightness in it. I despise your feasts, and I will take no delight in your solemn assemblies.
Okay. So we're looking at where God mentions the day of the Lord and how he is using it as a way to explain his judgment. So, when a man flees from a lion and is met by a bear, you're getting away from the lion, you're like, yes. And then,
Rocking a hard place.
yeah, there you go. That is what it is. Okay, Obadiah 1, 15 and 16.
For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been.
Okay. We talked a little bit about this last time because it says that the day of the Lord is near. Sometimes we have things saying like the time is at hand. When Jesus was teaching, he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So what does that mean? That the day of the Lord is near.
It could happen at any moment.
Well, isn't it like the next step after Jesus died and came back to life and then rose up to heaven? This is like the next part of the plan.
we talked about how the first represents the flesh and the second represents the spirit, right? The first Adam represented the flesh. Jesus is the second Adam. He represents the spirit. We see this pattern throughout. When God called Abraham, well, actually, Cain and Abel. Cain represented the flesh. Abel represented the spirit. He was the lineage of Christ. We see this pattern in when Abraham had Ishmael. That was a fleshly solution to the problem of not having a child, and then God blessed them and gave them Isaac, and he was the son of promise, representing the spirit. We see this with the kings. Saul was the first king, but he represented the flesh. He was head and shoulders above the rest. He was handsome. The people wanted him because he looked kingly. The second king of Israel was David, a man after God's own heart. He represents the spirit. So we see this pattern. There's another pattern that emerges where there's a promise that God makes that is first fulfilled like spiritually and then fulfilled physically. So one of that is like the kingdom. So one of the things that divides the church is Christ king now?
Yes and no.
That verse felt very eternal, like it was speaking eternally, indefinitely, like it's part of the present moment, every moment, all the time, and always our choice. To me, but it sounds like you're speaking of a specific sequence.
So there's a large part of the church that holds to all millennial teaching, which means that the kingdom was established at Jesus' death and resurrection and is continuing now. That the reign of Christ, we're in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. That he is currently ruling and reigning. There's another part of the church, a smaller group that believes that although there's a spiritual truth there, there's going to be a future 1,000-year reign where he's physically ruling and reigning on the throne of David with a rod of iron over the nations.
Hasn't it been more than 1,000 years since Jesus died?
Well, that became a problem.
It's not a literal 1,000 years.
It was at first. So they did teach that they were in the 1,000-year reign, and that Christ was going to come back.
And then 1,000 years ended.
And they had to come up with this reason. So then they started spiritualizing the 1,000 years as it's just a time period.
Well, for a long time, our calendar system wasn't exactly rock solid until the Pope was active.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of play on that micrometer, you know.
Well, it was in place. It was just very difficult because you had to go from the time of the kings and the rulers, right? Like Isaiah 6 starts in the year King Uzziah died. Right, he goes to the temple. He sees the Lord. So that was a marker. The way we say 1975, he says the year King Uzziah died. They would know what that was. You just had to go by all the kings, and it became laborious.
Right.
But the so the church is divided on whether it's a physical reign, like it's all the reign of Christ, or is this a spiritual representation? God is on his Father's, Jesus is on his Father's throne in heaven, waiting for the time that he'll sit on David's throne in Jerusalem, ruling and reigning. And so one of the things that I want to look at is, what does the Bible say the 1,000-year reign will be like? Because if we're in it, it should be like the Bible says it is. And if it's not like that, then it's got to be a future reign and not a present reign.
Or
Um,
past.
Or what?
Or past.
Um,
Oh, sorry. I mean, yeah.
Well, Jesus has never sat on the throne physically and ruled.
Okay.
So, the end of Revelation, when Jesus comes back physically to the earth, he has a tattoo on his thigh that says King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he's coming back to establish himself in that role. The amillennials believe that he's coming to rule and reign over his people, the church. The postmillennialists, or the premillennialists believe that he's coming to establish his 1,000-year reign, and he's reigning over actual people who come through the tribulation period. So those are the differences in how you approach some of these passages. But in Revelation chapter 6, verse 9, I'm just going to read this one verse. You can turn if you want, but it says, "When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" The role and function of the Babylonian system is to destroy God's people. Right? God brought Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, to Israel to judge his people. And that's what they did. But it was also this established system that is Satan's kingdom, Satan's rule, and the role is to rid the earth of God's people. And so we see that throughout. We see that when Christianity was established, when the church is born on Pentecost and they start going out to spread the gospel, what happens? We have Stephen. What happened to Stephen? He was stoned to death. Why? Because he was sharing the gospel. And then we see that the result of sharing the gospel around the world, as the church is infiltrating the Babylonian system, their response is kill the Christians. And it's still happening today. Well over 1 million Christians are killed every year. All over the world. And that number just continues to grow. And so those are the ways in which the Babylonian system is being judged. And part of what we see in Revelation is the souls of those who have been killed for their faith are like, God, when are you going to avenge us? Well, the day of the Lord is that. It is God judging the nations. It's God judging Babylon for what it's done to his people throughout time.
Which they couldn't have orchestrated that sooner, and it's like you can spread the word all you want, but it's only God that's going to decide when everyone meets their actual fate.
Right.
And so it's like no one can be saved, but when they choose to save themselves, and
right.
God saves them.
Well, and what we saw last, when we were looking at Obadiah and the judgment on the Edomites were very wealthy and successful. They lived in a region where there was caves and where they could be protected. If you've ever seen the picture of Petra, which is carved out of the rock, lots of the surrounding nations, the Edomites held their gold because it was so safe that nobody could get to them. And then the Jews are crying out, how long, God, are you going to let these people like attack us and destroy us and help our enemies? And but when you go back in history, you see that the judgment that God gives against the Edomites, their neighbors decide to plunder them. It's like, well, why are we giving them all our gold? Let's just take it and get rid of them. And then the last of the Edomites were in 70 AD when Jerusalem was being attacked and destroyed. 20,000 of the Edomites went to help the Jews fight against the Romans, and they were all wiped out in that attack. So then that's essentially the end of the Edomites. So we see that in some of these judgments, God is dealing with the enemies of Israel, and they get destroyed. There are no Hittites today, right? There are no Jebusites today. They've been eliminated. These were the enemies of Israel that God has judged and taken away. His judgment has been fulfilled on them. But the judgment against Babylon has not. The kingdom of the earthly rule of Babylon, like Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, they were conquered. But that system, the political religious system, is what continued on. And that's what's being addressed and judged when we look at these passages. Ali, you had Zephaniah?
Mm-hmm.
Zephaniah 1, 6, and 8.
Those who have turned back from following the Lord, who do not seek the Lord or inquire of him, be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice and consecrated his guests. And on the day of the Lord's sacrifice I will punish the officials and the king's sons for all who array themselves in foreign attire.
So we see again that God is setting up that day. And setting it aside. All right.
Mr. Fogel, can you recall the name of the island nation that Alexander the Great took down? They built a land bridge.
Yeah.
I was trying to recall it because I was talking to Don about it earlier this week at work, and I just had it on the tip of my brain, and I can't remember it.
Oh my gosh. It wasn't Cyprus. It was
The cool part about it was the prophecy said that it'll only be a place where fishermen fish. And then
it said that it would be destroyed and scraped clean.
right. And then I looked up on Google Maps, and now it's no longer an island because they built a land bridge, so it's a peninsula. And on the satellite imagery, there's fishermen sitting there right there, just like it said. And I was like, oh,
right.
Yeah.
Well, because what happened was the first time, because it was on the mainland, and so the main part of the city was on the mainland, and so the first time that they came against it and set up the siege and everything to starve them out, they just sailed to the island and set up their
defenses.
They just set themselves up on the island.
Right.
So then they're like, neener, can't get to us.
And then he just built the land bridge. And,
so then
that's when he got cool.
They left and continued on their campaign, but as they were coming back through, I think is when they just they took all the material that was the walls and the buildings, and they just made the land bridge
until they could walk on it.
Until they had scraped it down to bedrock, and that's what it is today.
That's one of those things you could see in the book, and then see a perfect example of the prophecy still holding true, because there's still fishermen are sitting out there, right, like it says, and you're just like, wow, that's kind of a trip, man.
Well, and some of the things because it gives a prophecy of Damascus in the same way.
Yeah.
Well, the city of Damascus is still around. It's one of the oldest I think it is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world.
Yeah.
but there's a judgment against Damascus. This is going to be destroyed, and that people won't even something like people won't even set up the tents or anything. But that hasn't happened, and so it's one of those things that is a future event.
Yeah, like I think Cyrus the Builder was the one that got the second temple going, right? And then we're still waiting on the third.
Yeah,
One of those situations.
yeah.
That's cool. It was good
Okay.
seeing you again.
Yeah,
man.
you too.
God bless.
You guys are welcome back
Melanie, you
anytime.
guys can
Yeah.
sit here.
Thank you.
They're gonna go.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone, for welcoming us.
Oh yeah. Hope you come again. It was nice to meet you
Yeah.
all. Meet you guys.
Bye.
And if
Have a
we can,
lovely
Dominic will show them where we meet next time.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
another house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Furniture. Here's what couches. My word, your butt's not going numb.
It's
They're
so
cold.
cold.
I know. It's funny.
I was freezing over
That's
there.
why I have a long sleeve shirt on under mine now. Oh yeah. Time to walk in. All right. Oh, he's just fussy. He can go be fussy at home. It's nice of you to invite them, Dominic.
Yeah, Mike was asking me because I told him about it. And he was like, "Well, I've been wanting to get back to church." And he's like, "What's that life group thing you do?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, we just meet up every Wednesday, 6 to 8." And he's like, He couldn't the past 2 weeks. I had texted Lance, letting him know that Mike was gonna come, but he was busy with work. And then the week before, he hurt his back really bad.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but yeah, he was able to come this week. It's pretty cool.
Good.
All right. So what I want to look at now is the part of the day of the Lord that is God dealing with his people specifically. So the nations, it's a time of judgment. He's going to destroy the nations. He's going to destroy Babylon. It is the judgment against all the nations that rail against him, like we read about in Psalm 2. So when you read through the Old Testament, you see that a pattern develops with Israel. Because whenever they're in trouble, they cry out to God. And then God delivers them. And then they respond in obedience and worship. He restores them to the land. Then they become comfortable. Then they become complacent. They start to compromise. Not the generation that God saved, but the next generation. So the generation that didn't have the direct revelation or experience with God is the generation that becomes complacent. They start to compromise. Then they move away from God. They start worshiping other gods. Then God will send a nation in to conquer them. And in that situation, they cry out to God, and then he delivers them, and then they go through this cycle. And so when you read through starting in Judges and all the way through the Kings, the history of Israel is this pattern that basically gets established. So in their time where they're crying out to God, he makes these promises of deliverance. And some of these promises are fulfilled within the people that are crying out. But ultimately, there's promises that God made to Israel that are still not fulfilled, right? So, so some of those will come out as we go through these next passages. I need some more readers, or those readers again. Dominic, would you do Jeremiah 30?
Yep.
7 and 8. And Tyler, Isaiah 11:11. Cody. Do Zephaniah 3:11 and 13, 11 to 13. We'll start with those. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. Alas, that day is so great, there is none like it. It is a time of distress for Jacob, yet he shall be saved out of it. And it shall come to pass in that day, declares the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off your neck, and I will burst your bonds, and foreigners shall no more make a servant of him.
Okay. So what is the promise to the Jews?
That'll free them.
God's gonna free him. Foreigners shall no more make you servants. What is happening to Israel right now? Today. Nobody knows.
Israel and Palestine.
Okay. The Palestinian problem, right? Israel was attacked. They responded. The world says, "Whoa, whoa, calm down. You're doing too much." Right? You're an apartheid nation. We need to boycott and divest against Israel. So Israel's the problem. God says that Israel will become the cup of trembling, and all the nations will come against Israel. And we're really starting to see that develop. Well, for 2,000 years there was no Israel, right? Because once, when Titus came and destroyed Jerusalem and took them all captive, Israel was a nation no longer. Temple was destroyed. The capital city was destroyed. The inhabitants were taken away. The Romans were established as to rule the area, and there was no nation of Israel. And so again, for 2,000 years, you have people reading the Bible and these promises God made Israel, and like, well, there is no Israel, so what do we do with these promises? One of the solutions was to say, oh, well, then these promises are meant for the church and not Israel. And so you have a theology and a teaching that says that the church replaced Israel, and that's what these promises are for. But then in 1948, Israel became a nation again. And then people are like, oh, so there's verses that say, can a nation be born in a day? Well, Israel was. One day there was no Israel, and the next day they declared and became a nation, and the next day after that they were attacked by 5 countries, and Israel won the war. They didn't even have an organized military, and they won the war. So we see that they're still waiting for some of these promises, right? That the nations. So right now, every decision that's made, all of the nations are pressuring Israel to do it this way, to do it that way. The UN keeps putting sanctions on them and saying how awful Israel is. And so there's never been a time where Israel has, since the time of Solomon, when they had a kingdom and they were prosperous, they've always been struggling and under the influence and power of other nations, right? When Babylon came and conquered them, they have been conquered ever since. Sometimes they had more freedom. Under certain empires, they had more freedom than others. When Cyrus, when they took Cyrus, the book of Isaiah, and said, look, God said 250 years ago that you were going to send us to rebuild our temple. Cyrus is like, oh, that's cool. Okay, go. Gives them all the money and the freedom to go do that. So they got to basically be in charge of themselves for a while, and then the Greeks came and conquered the the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the Greeks exercised control over them, and then the Roman army conquered the Greeks, and so they had been a conquered nation for hundreds of years in that way. And so God's promise to them is that the foreigner shall no longer make you a servant. Isaiah 11:11.
In that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people. From Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea.
Okay. So God says, I'm going to regather my people from all over the world. And so some people say, well, this was fulfilled when they came back from Babylon. Right after the 70 years, some of the people came back and rebuilt the temple and the city of Jerusalem, and they're saying, well, that's when it was fulfilled. But some of these places that are mentioned are in the opposite direction of Babylon. Yeah.
In the beginning of the verse it says, in that day. Is it referring to the day of the Lord?
Yeah.
Okay. But
so he's calling people from all over. Cush is Egypt. And then you have the coastlands of the sea. So you're talking about people from all over. Usually that referred to like the Mediterranean Sea and the nations around there. But also when the Bible mentions the sea, he's talking about like all the nations of the world.
so is that happening right now? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So what we're seeing is, so when after World War I, they established a homeland for Israel. It was actually current Israel and Jordan. So the country of Jordan was all part of the land they set aside for Israel. So they said, okay, Jews, here you go. We made a homeland for you. And the Jews like, I don't want to move there. I live in Europe. I'm fine. I live in Russia. I'm fine. I live in Romania, right? They're perfectly fine.
So it is the day of the Lord? Is that what that means?
It is the preparation for that. And this is why lots of people think we're getting close to this time, because so they had the land, but nobody came, and then World War II happened. What happened in World War II?
The Jews were all persecuted, so they.
Hitler, right, was trying to kill all the Jews. Before Hitler, Russia was having these pogroms where they were persecuting the Jews. And so all throughout Europe, the Jews, they had been persecuted for a long time. The Roman Catholic Church was the ones who started putting the yellow stars on them back in the 1200s. So Hitler's just like, oh, I like that idea. Let's do that again. And so through the persecution that happened during World War II, then all the Jews started moving to what is Israel today. So that started the migration. But since then, there's been several waves where people just are like, we're going to move to Israel. And they just pack up their stuff and they go. So Israel has people, hundreds and thousands of people every year moving back to Israel. But what's happening now is there's starting to be more persecutions all over Europe, here in America. The persecutions against the Jews are increasing. So more and more people are like, well, it's safe in Israel. And at the same time, because Israel was attacked and now they're spreading their the area of safety. They've gone into Syria and they moved the border back. I mean, they've eliminated terrorists for like 30 miles so that the rockets can't get to where they're at. So they're pushing their enemies back currently, which means that Israel is becoming a safer place. And so people are seeing that, and they're starting to go back.
Wasn't the day of the Lord mentioned in the New Testament though? Like, didn't the New Testament people think they were in like the day of the Lord was near too?
When Jesus goes to the Jews, he's offering the kingdom of heaven to be established. If the Jews would have welcomed Jesus and followed him as the king, then that would have ushered in the kingdom, and he would have been established as king. But because God said that he would be rejected, even his Jesus' parable of the vine growers, right, where he says that the guy bought a vineyard, and then he went away, and then he sent his servants to come and collect, and they killed the servants, and then finally he sent his son, and they said, "Oh look, let's kill the son, and then we'll inherit the kingdom." So then Jesus gives that parable to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees realize that it was a parable about them. Well, they didn't repent and ask for forgiveness. They killed Jesus. Like, they went on and did that, right? So the Jews had to reject Jesus. Then the church was born, and the Gentiles were welcomed in, and it became the time of the Gentiles. And so we're living in that time of the Gentiles. So from Pentecost, where the church was established, and then Peter's on the roof and he has the vision of the blanket coming down and all the food, and then he goes to Cornelius' house and he preaches the gospel, and they become saved, and like, oh, the gospel's for the Jews, for the Gentiles too. That's the birth of the church. And so that so we're living in that time. When that time is over, when the rapture happens, then the day of the Lord begins, the time of Jacob's trouble, that the final series of judgments. So it starts with the Antichrist being lifted up. That's going to start a 7-year time period in which the first 3.5 years is the kingdom of Antichrist being developed and established. Then and the Jews support that. They're all about it. And then in the middle of that, he declares himself God, and then he starts persecuting the Jews. And the second 3.5 years is persecution of the Jews. And then God miraculously saving his people. At the same time, there's 144,000 Jews that are preaching the gospel. There's 2 witnesses, Elijah and one other one. People argue whether it's Moses or Enoch. But they're the first 3.5 years, so they're persuading people to believe in Jesus. The church has been removed in the rapture. And so all of these things are happening. That is the time of the day of the Lord. And so you have the 7 seals, you have the 7 bowls, you have the 7 trumpet, all these series of judgments that make up and constitute what the day of the Lord is. So when you read through Revelation, all of that is this time period, the day of the Lord. And then ultimately it ends with with Babylon being destroyed, Jesus coming back, destroying all of his enemies, and establishing the kingdom. Do Zephaniah 3.
On that day you shall not be put to shame because of the deeds by which you have rebelled against me. For then I will remove from your midst, your proudly exalted ones, and you shall no longer be arrogant in the holy mountain, but I will leave in your midst a people humble and lowly. They shall seek refuge in the name of the Lord, those who are left in Israel. They shall not do injustice and speak no lies, nor shall there be found in their mouths a deceitful tongue, for they shall gaze and lie down, and none shall make them afraid.
Okay. So, so he's establishing the Jews, right? And he's purifying the people. In Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it says, "At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, every one whose name shall be found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." So it's talking about the final judgment, that Israel will be delivered, and then there's going to be a judgment. And so the day of the Lord is a time of judgment of the nations. It's also a time where God establishes his people. Go to Isaiah chapter 2. There's a couple places in Isaiah where he talks about this future reign. So Isaiah 2 says this: "The word which Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it will come about that in the last days the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many people will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge between the nations, and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war.'" So it says that the mountain of the Lord will be the highest mountain. And the nations will come to Israel to learn about the Lord. Is that happened? Has it happened? Is it happening?
Well, their mountains are going to have to fall, or that one's going to have to be raised up.
Do the nations come to learn about the Lord?
Yeah.
In what way?
That's where you get to go and walk through where Jesus walked through, right? Where people go to Israel to see where Jesus did things.
Sure. But are the nations today doing that?
No.
I mean, there are people from every nation who get saved, and there are people who go on tours of Israel to walk where Jesus walked and do all that. But the nations aren't going to Israel and asking them for, right? Israel doesn't even Israel's not even proclaiming Jesus because they're in rejection of Jesus. So something has to change. And then this section ends with, there never again will the people learn war. Are there wars happening? So
So is this time after the tribulation, before the millennial reign?
no, this will be in the millennial reign.
So it's after the tribulation.
Yeah.
Right.
So
The tribulation destroys mountains and destroys oceans, and so that's why Jerusalem would then be the highest mountain or whatever.
yeah, because it says earlier in one of the passages, it says that the earth will tremble, and in Revelation it talks about that. It talks about the mountains being pushed down. It talks about the you guys have heard of Pangea, right? You guys know what Pangea is? The movement of the earth away from.
Separating the continents.
Well, lots of people think that during that time when the earth is shaken, and the mountains are put down, that God is reestablishing, like.
So everything's connected
one
again for
continent.
the millennial reign. Everything is all in one.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
and then Jerusalem will be like the center of the world. And so when it talks about the earthquakes, and when it talks about islands being toppled, and when it talks about mountains being moved from their foundations, that's kind of the idea that's being put forth.
What's weird is some Jews read the Bible, right? So they know what's predicted and prophesied. So they should know that anyone that comes that doesn't like descend from the clouds like Christ, the way that I'm leaving is the way that I will return, would be the Antichrist. And yet he's going to epitomize everything they wanted, which is going to be like this world leader and all this stuff. So they're going to still flock to him. Yet if they know anything from Scripture, because some of them do read the Bible, they should know that that is not.
But they don't read the New
so
Testament.
they don't even care. Yeah.
Right? That's Acts chapter 1, and they don't read the New Testament.
Yeah. But someone has to have told them that, like, don't follow the one that doesn't return
Well,
from the sky. You know what I mean? Like.
well, so there. So two things. One, the way Jesus. The reason they rejected Jesus was because he was common and lowly and not powerful and in authority. They were expecting Messiah to come and deliver them and punish the nations and make them bow. Well, the Antichrist is going to do that.
That's what I'm saying. That's why that will be appealing to
That's
them.
why
but
that
they
will be appealing to
should still
them.
know that that's not the one that is really going to do
Because
all of that.
what he's going to promise are these things. Once his kingdom is established, there will be peace. When he tells the people, "Hey, leave Israel alone," they're going to do that. And Israel's going to be in this position of like a false elevation.
What's crazy is he's only going to get that power that God will allow him to have.
Yes.
Because he has no
Correct.
power that isn't given to him by God. So God's
Right.
allowing that to happen.
Yes.
Because he knows that the Jews are going to follow him, and then in the end, he's going to deliver them anyway, like was the cycle you've talked about, them
Right.
going through all of
Yes. If you go to Isaiah chapter 11. It says, "Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and strength, the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord, and he will not judge by what his eyes see, nor make a decision by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he will judge the poor, and decide with fairness for the afflicted in the earth. And he will strike the earth with a rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Also righteousness will be the belt about his loins, and faithfulness the belt around his waist. This is the promise of the Messiah. Did Jesus do this?
Yeah, I mean, he was
Did
the
he
root of
slay the
Jesse.
wicked? Did he strike the earth with a rod of his mouth?
No, that's the future.
Okay. So here's the struggle the Jews had of looking for the Messiah, because the shoot will spring up from the stem of Jesse and the branch from its roots. What does Isaiah 53 say?
He'll grow up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. Be no beauty or majesty to him.
So Isaiah 53 uses that same thing, right? To whom has the arm of the Lord, the Messiah, been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. It's the same root, right? Root and branch. That's all reference to the Messiah. But then you start reading Isaiah 53, and it's like he was despised and forsaken, a man of sorrows, right? He was pierced, he was crushed, he was chastened. Well,
There's nothing attractive about him. I mean, it just so
Right.
they knew that, and they still didn't.
so here, Isaiah 11, the Messiah. Isaiah 53, the Messiah. But they're incongruent. They don't mesh. It's two totally different Messiahs.
See, in Isaiah 9, that's when it's talking about, like, he'll be born as a child.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, the second will be that he'll be coming down from the clouds. So those are the two different
Right.
versions.
So there are still Jews today who believe that there will be two Messiahs.
What?
Because one is the suffering servant,
Yeah.
and one is the powerful ruler.
But they don't agree that Jesus came as a suffering servant. You mean they still
Right.
believe two are coming?
Yes, but Jesus, he wasn't one.
See, but then they just discount everything else in the Bible that talks about, like,
Right.
Jesus being the one and only Savior. So then is one a Savior and the other is something else, or are they both the Savior?
I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time reading what they say that the false ones are. But this becomes part of the struggle, and that's why when Antichrist sets himself up as this powerful ruler, they're going to accept him as Messiah.
But then who's their suffering servant? If they still believe there's two, why do they just automatically
So
accept
they,
it?
in a lot of cases, they become the suffering. If you ask Jews today what Isaiah 53 is about, they say, "Oh, that's about Israel.
Mhm.
We are the suffering ones. We are the ones that everybody."
So it's a metaphor.
Yeah. Part of the problem is this: when they rejected Jesus, the sacrificial system continued. The temple was in place, right? Peter and John went to the temple, and they saw the guy on this, silver and gold have we none, but what we have we give you. So the temple was still there, and so Judaism was still happening. When Rome came and destroyed the temple and Jerusalem, Yohanan ben Zakkai was part of the priesthood. He might have been the high priest. He was snuck out during the siege, and he and some of the priests got away, and everything in Jerusalem was destroyed. So they didn't have a temple anymore. They couldn't sacrifice. So now what do? You're a Jew, and God requires a sacrifice in order to be right. So they rewrote the sacrificial system. and it became a system of good works. You are the one who does good works. You sacrifice yourself. You do the work. And so
Which
so
is
the
what they're
new-
still doing to this day.
So
Because
so now Judaism is the system of good works that satisfy and meet the requirements of sacrifice. So most people today, your Ben Shapiro's and people like that, they read some Bible, but mostly they read what the rabbis say about the scriptures. So they'll follow Rabbi so-and-so and what he interprets and his interpretation, which is an interpretation of an interpretation of an interpretation.
so he still thinks that someone has to sacrifice on his behalf for his sins because the
No,
Messiah didn't.
they, whenever they do good works, they're fulfilling the sacrifice.
See, but then they're like proclaiming their own righteousness. Because then it
Correct.
comes down to like, what if when they die they needed like one more good work,
Which is,
but then it outweighs
right.
the bad that they did, and if they didn't meet that, then they're not going to heaven.
And they're determining what's good
Correct.
and evil in this world because what's good to one might not be
Right.
good to another.
So then, what do they do about the passages that say like our righteousness is like filthy rags? Do they just think that's
Is that the
a
New
metaphor
Testament?
for
So they don't
something?
read the
No,
New
that's in
Testament?
Isaiah too.
Oh. No, I was just asking.
They've reinterpreted it to mean something.
Or like the Jehovah's
Different.
Witness, they rewrite it and add
Yeah.
other things
Yeah,
to make
to
it
fit.
their theology.
Yes.
Which they do the same thing because they follow the Watchtower literature and
Right.
they only go off of what they say.
Yeah.
And nothing. They don't do any research on their own that isn't
Right.
Watchtower. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right.
So then it's kind of the same thing for them.
Do they
Correct.
print those every week or like is it a yearly thing? Like
Yeah.
the guys you work with, they just read one every week, or when
Yeah.
they go to
What's
church.
the
Whatever.
Watchtower?
It's like
It's a whole
the Jehovah's Witness religion. It's like
little handbook.
no, it's a website.
Oh.
And they like don't they interpret
Every-
stuff and then, like feed it down to
Yeah.
them who follow it?
So,
That's crazy. You're back to like when the Catholic Church
Every
didn't
week-
even let their
right.
parishioners have the Bible and it was only
Yeah.
what they told them.
So every week, Jehovah's Witnesses, when they gather, they're all reading the same.
Catholics do
material.
a lot of that too.
It's the same passage, the same interpretation, the same shared reading, the same like worship songs. It's a
Collective
scripted. It's a scripted program that the Watchtower sends to all the people, and they all follow it.
That's their leaders. You
Yeah.
call the Watchtower like their leaders.
It's
their biblical scholars.
yeah. It's the
Called.
it's the organization that the Mormons have. The Mormon Temple. That's the organization and the power structure that disseminates everything to them. Okay, so back in Isaiah 11, it's talking about the Messiah. But then in verse 6 it says, "And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. And the cow and the bear will graze, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of a cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den, and they will not harm or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the nations will resort to the root of Jesse, who will stand as a signal for the people, and his resting place will be glorious. Then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover the second time with his hand the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he will lift up a standard for the nations, and assemble the banished one of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." So it's talking about this future, it's talking about this time where the earth is going to be restored to what it was like before the flood. Before the flood, there was no predator prey. The animals were vegetarian. And so there was no animosity between the animal kingdom and the human. They all got along. Which means I guess they had like pet lions and all kinds of cool things when they just got along with them. So so either when Jesus establishes his rule on the earth, it gets restored, because it talks about where does it talk about that a baby dying at 100 is
Like
considered
verses
cursed?
of the Thessalonians talk about this too.
Yeah, but there's another,
But this is more
thought
like the
that was-
millennial reign. This isn't like this isn't the new heavens and the new earth.
right.
This is just, which does not sound like the world
Correct.
we live in right
So
now. That's why.
before the flood, humans lived 800-900 years. There's passages that talk about that in the millennial reign. In the 1,000-year reign, if a child dies at 100, he will be considered a curse. Like
It's Isaiah
What
65:20 then.
65:20. Are you there? Do you have it?
No.
Okay, I'm right there. 65:20. 19 says, I will also rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people, and they will no longer be heard in her the voice of weeping and the sound of crying. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach the age of 100 will be thought accursed. They will build houses and inhabit them. They will also plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They will not build and another inhabit. They will not plant and another eat. For as the lifetime of a tree, so will be the days of my people, and my chosen ones will wear out the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain, nor bear children for calamity, for they are the offspring of those blessed by the Lord, and their descendants with them. So it's talking about like this time of restoration that's like pre-flood. Jesus will be ruling and reigning. There will be no wars. There will be no famines. Israel has no enemies to be afraid of.
Will there still be sin? Because you didn't say sin, but mine says the sinner, or is it just referring to like the people?
So when Jesus establishes at the end of the tribulation period, when Jesus delivers the Jews, there's a separation of the sheep and the goats. Those that were the Jews that believe in him will be ushered in, and then there's people that help the Jews because they just thought it was wrong what was happening to them. They're not necessarily followers of Jesus, but they were good to the Jews. They get to go into the kingdom. Then the first generation of people will have children, and there will be a population explosion like there was before the flood, because people are healthy. There's not sin and sickness and disease in the way that there is today. So those generations that come up will be just regular people who have to choose
They're
for
still
themselves.
human, so they would still have
Yes.
Adam's the whole like
Yes.
fall of
So they
man
still have a
and
sin. They still have a sin nature, but Satan has been cast out. He's been chained in the bottomless pit. So there's not the influence of evil. Satan is not ruling the world like he is today. He's put away. So Jesus is ruling. There's people are living in righteousness, and there's not like the devil made me do it. And still, even in that, people will choose not to follow Christ. So at the end of the 1,000-year reign, it says that Satan is released for a time. he draws people to himself and away from Christ, and then they try to make war with Jesus, and God just wipes them all out. And then that's the end in which God judges all of the sinners and all of the angels and casts them in the lake of fire, and then creates a new heaven and new earth, and then heaven. So the end of the 1,000-year reign, all evil gets punished and cast in the lake of fire, and all that remain get the new heaven and the new earth, and we live forever in heaven on earth. All right. Questions? Comments, thoughts, ponderings? No? Everybody totally understands? Ready to go?
I guess it's just a little confusing because the header of 65 verse 17 says the new heaven and the new earth. So that makes it sound like this is already on the new heaven and the new earth. And then it says, for behold, I create the new heaven and the new earth. And then it lists the things where it says, the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. So that makes it sound like it's on the new earth.
But there couldn't be
Well-
accursed if it's the new heaven, new earth, because then there really is the removal of sin. But I get what you're saying.
But it says the youth will die at the age of 100,
Mm-hmm.
And no one dies in heaven or
and there is
in
no
eternity.
death. So that
So it could just be oh my gosh, what is it called? Interpretation thing or something? I don't know.
What does that even mean when it says the youth will die at the age of 100?
Meaning that's considered young. Like 100 would be like the same as being 13 or something. But it's weird they would die, so right.
well, right. So part of when you read through Revelation, there's all of these judgments that destroy the earth. A third of the vegetation is destroyed. A third of the seas are destroyed. A third of humanity is destroyed. There's all these destructions. The fresh waters turn to blood. The earth is essentially destroyed and cursed. When Jesus comes back, there is a restoration. It says the earth wobbles on its axis. So there's destruction. It says the moon. Is the moon destroyed?
It doesn't reflect light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a few different
Stars
ways it
start to
describes
fall.
that. So at the end of this tribulation period, because God is punishing people and sin and the effects of sin, and so after the 7-year tribulation period, there is a restoration, and so. So that's what I would say that creating the new heaven and the new earth is restoring it to a state in which it can be inhabited for the 1,000-year reign. Because then the verses that follow still make sense in that, right? If we're talking about heaven, nobody dies. So it can't be talking about actual heaven, because nobody's gonna
So
die.
verse 20, when it prefaces it, what it's saying, there no more will there be, and then it lists all these things, kind of like what Cody's saying, if this is talking about it being a new heaven and a new earth, because verse 20 says, no more shall there be this in it, and then it lists all those things, like an infant that dies, an old man. So could it be describing maybe what did occur in the millennial reign or prior? But if this is talking about new heavens and new earth, maybe it's just saying these are the things that will not happen anymore. Like, no more will there be
Right.
the infant that dies,
Sure.
the old man who does not fill, or that you build houses and someone else can take them over, or that you labor in vain.
Right. Because in verse 25 it says again, the wolf and the lamb will graze together and the lion will eat straw like an ox.
Which could be either the millennial reign or heaven forever. Because we're still going to be amongst animals.
Right.
Our little pets might not be in heaven, but God's going to have animals up there that we...
Right.
So there will be still sin on the new earth, but not in the new heaven.
Yeah, in the millennial reign, there will be sin and people rejecting God, right? So part of the argument currently is, well, there's all this sin and evil in the world. The devil made me do it. All of these excuses, right? Because Satan is the ruler of this world. If Jesus would just appear and I could see him, I would believe. There's all these claims that people make. Well, the reality is their heart is evil. And so God removes all of these things that people say are the reason they don't believe. So Jesus is physically ruling and reigning. Satan has been bound. All of the,
all the saints are there in glorified bodies to minister
Right,
to them. Like
right,
if we all come back
right.
with Christ for the millennial reign, it's like there's so many people.
So in the face of all of this, on a restored earth, people will still refuse.
Well, because God doesn't get rid of pride until the final judgment.
Correct.
So there's still the pride of man
Yes.
who's like, I can do it myself. Even though Jesus is like right there, there's still
Right.
just prideful.
Right. And so even after 1,000 years of righteousness and all of these things, when Satan is released, he stirs up the pride in the people and they rebel against God.
Which is kind of exactly what he did to the angels too.
Yes. So even in an almost perfect environment, God is revealing that it's the heart of man that's wicked, and it's the pride in man that goes against God. And so God is just providing all of these ways in which he can demonstrate that he's attacking all the arguments of men, right? People will say, well, if there's a good God, why is this happening? And if this wasn't happening, then I would believe.
So he removes pain, disease, sickness, all the things that people are like, that is the effect of sin.
Right.
But people are like, why does God allow all this stuff
Right.
to happen? He removes all those things and people still will choose not to follow him.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's a hang up for a lot of people.
Right.
Is how does God allow like
Right.
genocide in countries, or
Yeah.
why does he let something happen to my child, or
Yep. And so, having removed all of those, people still refuse because it's a heart condition, not an environmental condition. All right. All I got. Next week we'll go over Joel chapters 2 and 3 because it talks about the day of the Lord and gives us more information on that. But now that we've looked at those different aspects of the day of the Lord, now when we read through Joel, it'll make more sense. Okay. Any prayer requests before we pray? No? Everybody's good? Okay. Great. All right, let me pray. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your mercy. God, I pray that our time together tonight was just an encouragement, a time of enlightenment. That God, the more we learn about you, the more we love you, and the more we see your love for us. So I thank you for that. Pray that as we go through the rest of our week, that you would just, God, show us more about you. Just open your word to us, cause us to see you in a new way. And I just thank you and praise you, God, for all that you do. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.